"Mom, we need to leave, now," I said, voice trembling. The words tumbled out before I could stop them, my heart pounding with a sense of dread that had become all too familiar. "Honestly, Claire, I can't deal with your nonsense right now," she sighed, not even glancing up from her magazine. "You're always overreacting about something." I swallowed hard, the dismissal stinging as it always did. From as far back as I could remember, I'd had these inexplicable gut feelings, warnings that would scream at me to avoid certain situations or people. More often than not, they proved to be accurate, like the time I insisted we leave a restaurant only for a horrific kitchen fire to break out minutes later, or when I pleaded with Mom to take a different route home and we narrowly missed a multi-car pileup. But instead of being praised for my intuition, I was labeled as a troublemaker, a jinx. My parents brushed off my concerns, chalking them up to an overactive imagination or attention-seeking behavior. The only one who seemed to understand was my little sister Julia, who would cling to me whenever I sensed danger, her big eyes wide with trust. That trust slowly eroded as we grew older. With each passing year, the rift between Julia and me widened, fueled by our parents' blatant favoritism. While I was constantly criticized for my oddness, Julia could do no wrong in their eyes. She was the golden child, showered with affection and opportunities that I could only dream of. "Claire, you're being ridiculous," Mom snapped, jolting me back to the present. "We're not going anywhere. Your sister has an important dance recital tonight, and we're not missing it because of your silly premonitions." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words died on my lips. It was no use. They never listened, no matter how dire the situation. With a heavy heart, I retreated to my room, the feeling of dread growing stronger with every step. Little did I know, that night would be the beginning of a downward spiral, one that would test the limits of my family's loyalty and push me to the brink of losing everything, including myself. High school should have been a fresh start, a chance to shed the labels that had followed me for years. Instead, the neglect from my parents only intensified, and the chasm between Julia and me grew wider with each passing day. "Did you see Julia's new outfit?" Mom gushed one morning over breakfast. "She looks absolutely stunning." I forced a smile, trying to ignore the pang of jealousy that twisted my gut. Of course, they had splurged on yet another designer ensemble for their precious daughter. "And her dance recital is this weekend," Dad chimed in, beaming with pride. "We can't wait to see her perform." The unspoken words hung heavy in the air. They couldn't care less about my activities or accomplishments. Not that I had many to speak of. My parents had made sure of that, constantly shooting down any interests or hobbies I tried to pursue. "What about you, Claire?" Mom asked, almost as an afterthought. "Anything exciting happening in your life?" I opened my mouth, but the words died on my lips. What was the point? They would only dismiss or criticize whatever I said, as usual. "No, nothing," I mumbled, staring down at my half-eaten breakfast. Julia shot me a smug grin from across the table, her perfect features twisted into a look of pure disdain. She knew she held all the power, basking in our parents' endless adoration while I withered in her shadow. The months ticked by and the pattern repeated itself endlessly. Julia blossomed into a popular, confident young woman, surrounded by a gaggle of admirers and drowning in praise from our parents. Meanwhile, I faded into the background, my warnings and concerns falling on deaf ears. "Claire, you're being ridiculous," Mom would scoff whenever I tried to voice my intuition. "Stop trying to rain on your sister's parade." The words cut deep, reinforcing the belief that I was nothing more than a jinx, a burden to be brushed aside. Even Julia started to treat me with disdain, rolling her eyes whenever I opened my mouth. "No one wants to hear your crazy theories, weirdo," she sneered one day, her friends giggling behind her. I bit my tongue, swallowing the hurt and anger that threatened to spill out. What was the point of fighting back? They had already made up their minds about me. As the years passed, the isolation became suffocating. I watched from the sidelines as Julia's star continued to rise, her every whim catered to by our doting parents. They were blind to her true nature, the vicious jealousy that simmered beneath her perfect facade. Little did they know that jealousy would soon boil over, igniting a chain of events that would tear our family apart and force me to confront the harsh realities I had spent so long trying to ignore. The day Julia got scouted by the prestigious Westbrook Dance Academy should have been a celebratory occasion, but as soon as I laid eyes on the slick-haired recruiter, a sinking feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. "This is such an amazing opportunity," Mom gushed, her eyes shining with pride. "Julia is going to be a star." "I don't know," I began, but Dad cut me off with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Don't start with your negativity, Claire," he snapped. "For once, can't you just be happy for your sister?" I bit my tongue, the familiar taste of bitter resignation flooding my mouth. Of course, they wouldn't listen to my concerns, not when it came to their golden child. Over the next few weeks, the feeling of dread only intensified. I couldn't shake the sense that something was off about Westbrook, that their promises of fame and fortune were too good to be true. "Julia, please be careful," I pleaded one night as she packed her dance bag. "I have a really bad feeling about this place." She whirled around, her eyes blazing with fury. "Shut up, Claire. You're just jealous that I actually have talent and a future unlike you." The words stung, but I pressed on, desperate to make her understand. "I'm serious. Those people seem shady, and I don't want you to get hurt." Julia let out a derisive laugh. "Oh my God, you're delusional. Stay out of my business, freak." With that, she stormed out, leaving me alone with my mounting sense of dread. Sure enough, my worst fears were realized. Within weeks, the truth about Westbrook began to unravel. They were nothing more than a glorified exploitation ring, luring in talented students with promises of stardom, only to bleed their families dry with exorbitant fees and shady contracts. "How could you let this happen?" Dad raged, his face contorted with anger. "You jinxed this opportunity for your sister." "I tried to warn you," I pleaded, my voice trembling, "but none of you would listen to me." Mom shook her head, her lips curled in disgust. "This is all your fault, Claire. If you hadn't been so negative and discouraging, none of this would have happened." The words cut deeper than any knife, reinforcing the belief that I was nothing more than a burden, a blight on their perfect family. As the financial strain mounted, the tension in our household became unbearable. Julia grew increasingly resentful, her once bright future now tarnished by the failures of Westbrook. "I hate you," she hissed one night, her eyes burning with rage. "You've ruined everything for me, just like you always do." I wanted to scream, to shake her and make her see reason, but deep down, I knew it was pointless. In their eyes, I would always be the problem, the one to blame for every misfortune that befell our family. As the walls closed in around me, I found myself retreating further and further into a world of isolation, my only solace, the knowledge that I had tried to prevent this catastrophe. But even that small comfort was overshadowed by the growing realization that my family's love and loyalty had limits, and I had long since exceeded them. As the walls of isolation closed in around me, a glimmer of hope appeared in the form of Mrs. Reynolds, my English teacher. From the moment I stepped into her class, I sensed something different about her, a quiet understanding that seemed to radiate from her kind eyes. "Claire, can I speak with you for a moment?" she asked one day after class, a warm smile playing across her lips. I nodded warily, bracing myself for yet another adult who would dismiss or belittle me. But Mrs. Reynolds surprised me. "I can't help but notice the way you carry yourself," she began, her voice gentle. "It's almost like you're shouldering a weight that no one else can see." My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I considered brushing her off like I had so many others. But there was something about her demeanor, something that made me want to trust her. "It's complicated," I finally said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I have these feelings, these gut instincts that something bad is going to happen. And no matter how hard I try to warn people, they never listen." To my surprise, Mrs. Reynolds didn't laugh or roll her eyes. Instead, she nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "I understand more than you know, Claire," she murmured. "You see, I have a similar gift, a heightened sense of empathy that allows me to read people's emotions and intentions." I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. Could it be possible that I wasn't alone, that there was someone else out there who understood what I was going through? Over the following weeks, Mrs. Reynolds became my mentor, guiding me through the intricacies of my abilities and helping me to embrace them as a strength rather than a curse. "Your intuition is a powerful tool," she explained one day, "but but it's up to you to learn how to wield it wisely. With her guidance, I began to see the world through a new lens. The constant barrage of emotions and premonitions that had once overwhelmed me became manageable, even helpful. I started using my gift to assist friends and classmates, offering advice and warnings that were met with gratitude rather than scorn. "How did you know that Kyle was cheating on me?" my friend Sarah asked in amazement after I confronted her about her boyfriend's infidelity. "You're like a human lie detector." For the first time in my life, I felt seen and appreciated for who I truly was. The isolation that had once suffocated me began to fade, replaced by a newfound confidence and sense of purpose. But as my star rose, Julia's jealousy reached new heights. She sneered at my newfound popularity, her once adoring gaze now twisted with resentment. Of course the freak would find a way to steal the spotlight, she spat one day, her words dripping with venom. I tried to reason with her, to explain that my abilities weren't a ploy for attention, but she wouldn't hear it. In her eyes, I was nothing more than a threat to her own fragile ego, a constant reminder of her failures and our parents' misplaced loyalty. As the tension between us escalated, I found myself caught in the crosshairs of a battle I never asked to be a part of. A battle for love, acceptance, and the right to be seen for who I truly was. Emboldened by Mrs. Reynolds' mentorship, I stepped out of the shadows and into a newfound confidence. No longer would I cower in fear of my abilities or allow others to dismiss them as mere delusions. "Claire, you have to help me," Sarah pleaded one day, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Kyle's been acting so strange lately, and I think he might be cheating on me." In the past, I would have hesitated, afraid of overstepping boundaries or being labeled a freak for voicing my suspicions. But now, I trusted my instincts implicitly. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," I said gently, placing a comforting hand on her arm. "But I've sensed something off about Kyle for a while now. His emotions towards you have shifted, and I don't think he's being faithful." Sarah's face crumpled, but she nodded, grateful for my honesty. Word of my unique insights spread quickly, and soon more and more of my classmates were seeking me out for guidance. "Claire, you have to tell me if Brad is serious about me or just stringing me along," Amanda begged, her voice trembling with uncertainty. I closed my eyes, tuning into the emotional currents that swirled around us. "He cares for you, Amanda," I said carefully, "but he's not ready for the level of commitment you're looking for." As the requests poured in, I found myself embracing a newfound sense of purpose. For the first time in my life, my abilities were being valued, not shunned or ridiculed. But not everyone was thrilled by my newfound popularity. Julia's jealousy reached a fever pitch, her once adoring gaze now twisted with resentment and bitterness. Of course, the freak would find a way to steal the spotlight. She sneered one day as I offered advice to a group of classmates. I tried to reason with her, to explain that my intentions were pure, but she wouldn't hear it. In her eyes, I was nothing more than a threat to her fragile ego, a constant reminder of her failures and our parents' misplaced loyalty. "You're just jealous that people actually appreciate me for once," I shot back, my own frustration boiling over. Julia's face contorted with rage, and for a moment, I thought she might strike me. Instead, she leaned in close, her voice dripping with venom. "Enjoy your little moment in the sun, Claire," she hissed, "because I'm going to make sure it doesn't last." From that day on, the battle lines were drawn. Julia made it her personal mission to undermine me at every turn, spreading rumors and lies in a desperate attempt to claw back the attention she so desperately craved. But for once, her efforts were futile. My newfound confidence was unshakable, bolstered by the knowledge that I was finally using my abilities to help those around me. As the tension between us reached a boiling point, I couldn't help but wonder if our toxic sibling rivalry would ever be resolved, or if it was destined to consume us both in a blaze of jealousy and resentment. "You seriously think you deserve a seat here, Claire?" Julia smirked as I took my place at the family table for her wedding reception. The venom in her voice sent a chill down my spine, but I refused to back down. "Not this time." "Of course she does," Mom chided, though her tone lacked any real conviction. "She's part of the family." Julia let out a derisive laugh. "Barely. We all know you've never really accepted her gifts." She made air quotes with her perfectly manicured fingers. Before I could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Julia, this is outrageous. Leave your sister alone, or I'll have you removed from your own wedding." I whipped around to see none other than Mr. Anderson, the father of one of my closest friends, striding towards our table. His stern gaze swept over Julia and her new husband, Rick, leaving no doubt as to his distaste for their behavior. "Mr. Anderson," I stammered, equal parts relieved and mortified that he had witnessed Julia's cruelty. "You didn't have to." "Nonsense, Claire," he interrupted, his voice firm but kind. "I would be remiss if I didn't speak up in defense of someone who has done so much for my family and this community." Julia's face flushed a deep crimson, her carefully crafted facade of perfection cracking ever so slightly. Rick, meanwhile, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his bravado deflating like a punctured balloon. "What are you talking about?" Mom demanded, her eyes narrowing at Mr. Anderson. He smiled, seemingly unperturbed by her hostility. "Claire's unique abilities have been invaluable to my business ventures. Her insights and intuition have helped me navigate countless difficult decisions and partnerships, saving me from potential disasters time and time again." I felt a swell of pride in my chest, mixed with a twinge of guilt for not sharing these accomplishments with my family sooner. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't have mattered. They were too blinded by their favoritism towards Julia to ever truly appreciate my gifts. "Is this true, Claire?" Dad asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. I nodded, holding Mr. Anderson's supportive gaze. "It is, but I never wanted to make a big deal out of it. I was just trying to help where I could." Julia's face twisted into an ugly sneer, her carefully curated mask of perfection shattering completely. "Of course," she spat, "always the martyr trying to make me look bad." "That's enough, Julia," Mr. Anderson said firmly. "Your pettiness and jealousy towards your sister have gone too far. It's time for you to face the consequences of your actions." With those words, he turned to address the assembled guests, his voice ringing out clear and authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid I have some disturbing news to share about the bride and groom." As Mr. Anderson proceeded to lay bare the sordid details of Rick's shady past and Julia's manipulative behavior, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication wash over me. For too long, I had been the scapegoat, the outcast forced to bear the brunt of my family's dysfunction. But in that moment, the tables had turned. Julia's carefully constructed facade was crumbling, exposing the ugly truth that had been festering beneath the surface for years. And as the gasps and murmurs of shock rippled through the crowd, I knew that this was only the beginning, the first step towards reclaiming my rightful place in a family that had long since abandoned me. As Mr. Anderson's damning revelations about Rick and Julia's sordid behavior echoed through the stunned silence of the reception hall, I could practically feel the weight of years of mistreatment and neglect lifting from my shoulders. "Rick Thompson is nothing more than a con man, preying on wealthy families like yours to fund his lavish lifestyle," Mr. Anderson declared, his voice ringing with righteous fury. "And your daughter Julia was all too willing to be his accomplice, manipulating and deceiving everyone around her in pursuit of money and status." Julia's face had drained of all color, her perfect veneer cracking further with each word. Rick, meanwhile, seemed to shrink in on himself, the bravado he once exuded now replaced by a palpable sense of shame and fear. "You're lying," Julia shrieked, her voice shrill with desperation. "Rick loves me, and we're going to be so happy together." Mr. Anderson fixed her with a withering stare. "Wake up, Julia. The only thing Rick loves is your family's money. He's been using you from the start, and you were too blinded by your own greed and desire for validation to see it." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a torrent of hushed whispers and pointed stares. For the first time in my life, the tables had turned. Julia was the one being ostracized, her carefully cultivated image of perfection crumbling before our very eyes. "And as for you," Mr. Anderson continued, turning his steely gaze towards my stunned parents, "you should be ashamed of yourselves for enabling Julia's behavior and alienating Claire in the process." Mom opened her mouth to protest, but Mr. Anderson held up a hand, silencing her. "Don't bother denying it. I've seen firsthand how you've dismissed and belittled Claire's gifts, treating her like a pariah while showering Julia with endless praise and attention. Well, no more." He gestured towards me, his expression softening ever so slightly. Claire is an extraordinary young woman whose talents and insights have helped countless people, myself included. She deserves to be celebrated, not shunned by her own family. As his words washed over me, I felt a surge of emotion. Gratitude, vindication, and yes, a twinge of petty satisfaction at seeing Julia's carefully constructed facade finally shattered beyond repair. For years, I had been the outcast, the black sheep forced to bear the brunt of my family's dysfunction and cruelty. But in that moment, the tides had turned, and it was Julia who found herself on the outside looking in, her mask of perfection stripped away to reveal the ugly truth beneath. As the stunned silence gave way to a cacophony of whispers and murmurs, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. Finally, after years of suffering in silence, the truth was laid bare for all to see, and Julia had no one to blame but herself. With a deep breath, I straightened my shoulders and held my head high, basking in the knowledge that my long journey towards redemption and acceptance was finally within reach. The path ahead might be uncertain, but one thing was clear. I would never again allow myself to be defined by the cruelty and pettiness of others. From this moment on, I would forge my own destiny, unburdened by the weight of my family's toxic legacy. The weight of the past fell away as I stepped out into the crisp morning air, my meager belongings tucked into a battered suitcase. The door closed behind me with a decisive click, severing the final ties to the toxic environment that had once been my home. As I made my way down the familiar street, I couldn't help but reflect on the tumultuous journey that had led me to this point. The years of neglect and emotional abuse at the hands of my own family, the constant dismissal of my gifts, the unbearable strain of living in Julia's shadow, it all seemed like a distant nightmare, one that I had finally awakened from. The events of Julia's disastrous wedding had been the catalyst, the tipping point that had finally forced me to confront the harsh realities I had spent so long trying to ignore. With Mr. Anderson's support and my newfound confidence, I had mustered the strength to break free from the toxic cycle of manipulation and cruelty that had defined my relationship with my family for far too long. The confrontation had been explosive, a maelstrom of bitter accusations and long-festering resentments finally unleashed. Julia, of course, had been utterly unrepentant, hurling vicious insults and denials even as the evidence of her misdeeds mounted. "You're just jealous that I'm the one who's actually successful and happy," she had spat, her perfect facade now shattered beyond repair. Mom and Dad, meanwhile, had retreated into a defensive silence, their blind loyalty to Julia rendering them incapable of acknowledging the truth that had been laid bare before them. In the end, it had been a lost cause, a family so poisoned by dysfunction and favoritism that they were beyond redemption. And so, with a heavy heart, I had made the decision to walk away, to forge my own path and leave the toxic remnants of my past behind. As I navigated the familiar streets, each step felt lighter, as though a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The future stretched out before me, a blank canvas waiting to be painted with new experiences and possibilities. A small smile tugged at my lips as I thought of Mrs. Reynolds, the woman who had seen my gifts for what they truly were, not a curse, but a rare and precious talent to be nurtured and embraced. She had promised to help me find my footing, to connect me with others who understood the complexities of empathic abilities. For the first time in my life, I felt a sense of belonging, of being seen and accepted for who I truly was. No longer would I be defined by the cruelty and pettiness of others, but by my own strength and resilience. As I turned the corner, the rising sun cast a warm glow over the city, bathing the world in a soft golden light. It felt like a fitting metaphor for the new chapter unfolding before me, a chance to step out of the shadows and into a future filled with potential and possibility. With a deep breath, I squared my shoulders and pressed onward, the past finally receding into the distance. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew that I was ready to face them head-on, armed with the knowledge that I was no longer alone in this world. For the first time in my life, I was free to embrace my gifts, to forge my own destiny, and to leave the toxic legacy of my family behind once and for all. I stared at the test results in disbelief, my hands trembling. Eli's blood type was AB. How could that be possible when both Nolan and I had type O? The implications were staggering, and I felt my world starting to crumble. "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice barely above a whisper as I faced the stern-faced doctor. "Eli's blood type can't be AB. That's not possible." The doctor shook his head solemnly. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Parker, but the tests were conclusive. Your son's blood type is definitely AB." I sank back into the chair, my mind racing. How could this be happening? Nolan and I had been together for over a decade, and Eli was the product of our loving marriage. Yet this medical anomaly threatened to shatter everything I thought I knew. Just then, the door burst open, and Nolan stormed in, his face twisted with rage. "What the hell is going on, Jenna?" he demanded, his eyes narrowing. "The nurse said Eli's in the ICU and that his blood type is AB?" I steeled myself, knowing I had to be honest, even if it meant facing Nolan's wrath. "Yes, that's right. The test results are conclusive. Eli's blood type is AB, which is impossible given our own blood types." Nolan's face turned beet red, and he slammed his fist against the wall, making me flinch. "Impossible? The only thing impossible here is that Eli is my son. You've been unfaithful, haven't you, Jenna?" "What? No, Nolan, that's not true," I protested, my heart racing. "I would never do that to you or to Eli. You have to believe me." He let out a harsh laugh, shaking his head. "Believe you? How can I, when the evidence is right in front of us? Eli's not my son, which means you've been lying to me all this time." Tears welled up in my eyes as I reached out to him, desperately trying to make him understand. "Nolan, please, you have to listen to me. I would never cheat on you. Eli is your son. I swear it. There must be some other explanation for this." But Nolan was having none of it. He backed away, his face contorted with a mixture of hurt and anger. "Save it, Jenna. I've heard enough. I'm going to get a DNA test, and then we'll see who the real father is. And if Eli's not mine, well, let's just say you better start planning your future without us." With that, he stormed out, leaving me shattered and alone, my world turned upside down. I had to find a way to prove my innocence and save my family, no matter what it took. As I sat there, the weight of the situation pressing down on me, I knew one thing for certain: my life would never be the same again. The tension between Nolan and me had been simmering for years, but I never imagined it would boil over in such a devastating way. As I sat in the hospital, my mind raced, trying to make sense of the chaos that had erupted. Nolan's accusation of infidelity stung like a slap in the face. After all we'd been through together, how could he so easily dismiss my loyalty and faithfulness? But I knew his outburst was fueled by more than just the revelation about Eli's blood type. I thought back to the early days of our marriage, when Nolan's overbearing mother, Marge, had made my life a living hell. She was never satisfied, always finding fault with everything I did. No matter how hard I tried to please her, it was never enough. Marge had passed away a year ago, but her lingering influence still seemed to haunt our relationship. Nolan had always been quick to side with his mother, even when she was clearly in the wrong. It was as if he couldn't see past her manipulations, and I often felt like an outsider in my own home. Now, with Eli's unexpected blood type, Nolan had found the perfect excuse to turn on me. I knew I had to fight back, to prove my innocence and protect my son. I decided to seek legal counsel, determined to navigate this treacherous situation with a clear head and a solid strategy. As I waited in the attorney's office, I couldn't help but reflect on the numerous times Nolan had threatened to take Eli away from me. "If you ever step out of line, Jenna, I'll make sure you never see that boy again," he'd growl, his eyes dark with menace. The thought of losing Eli was my greatest fear, and I knew I had to do whatever it took to keep him safe. When the attorney finally arrived, I laid out the entire situation, leaving no detail untouched. She listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This is a very serious situation, Mrs. Parker," she said, her voice grave. "With Eli's blood type not matching either of yours and your husband's volatile reaction, we're looking at a custody battle that could get ugly." I swallowed hard, steeling myself for the fight ahead. I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to protect my son and prove my innocence. Nolan's accusations are completely unfounded, and I won't let him take Eli away from me. The attorney nodded, a glimmer of respect in her eyes. "Good. We'll need to start gathering evidence, including your medical records and any documentation that could shed light on Nolan's family history. If there's a discrepancy there, it could be the key to unraveling this entire mess. I felt a surge of determination. I'm ready. Let's do this. As I left the attorney's office, I knew that the battle lines had been drawn. Nolan's threats and Marge's lingering influence had only fueled my resolve. I would fight tooth and nail to keep my family together, no matter the cost. The drive home from the attorney's office was filled with a sense of urgency and determination. I knew that time was of the essence if I wanted to clear my name and keep Eli safe from Nolan's threats. As soon as I walked through the door, I headed straight to my home office, determined to start gathering the evidence I would need to build my case. I started by pulling up Eli's medical records, scrutinizing every detail, searching for any clues that could help explain the mysterious blood type discrepancy. But as I pored over the documents, I hit a wall. There was nothing out of the ordinary, no obvious explanations to be found. Frustrated, I decided to turn my attention to Nolan's family history, hoping that might shed some light on the situation. I began scouring through old family photos and documents, piecing together the puzzle of Nolan's past. It was then that I stumbled upon a curious letter, hidden away in the back of a desk drawer. The envelope was addressed to Nolan, but it had never been opened. My heart racing, I carefully tore it open, my eyes scanning the contents. What I read made my blood run cold. The letter was from Nolan's estranged aunt, Clara, and it contained a bombshell revelation. Nolan had been adopted as a child after being found abandoned. The details were sparse, but the implications were staggering. I quickly dialed Clara's number, my hands trembling. When she answered, I wasted no time in getting to the heart of the matter. "Clara, it's Jenna. I need to talk to you about Nolan. I found your letter, and I need to know the truth about his adoption." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost feel Clara's hesitation. "Jenna, I knew this day would come," she finally said, her voice heavy with regret. "Nolan's adoption was always a closely guarded family secret. Marge made sure of that." I gripped the phone tighter, my heart pounding. "Then it's true? Nolan was adopted?" "Yes, it's true," Clara confirmed, her words laced with sadness. "Nolan was found abandoned as a baby, and my brother and sister-in-law Marge adopted him. They never told him the truth, and Marge made sure no one else in the family ever breathed a word of it." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. If Nolan had been adopted, then that meant... "Oh my God, Clara, Eli's blood type. It all makes sense now." "I'm so sorry, Jenna," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is a terrible situation. I didn't know how to tell Nolan the truth, and now it's come to this." I took a deep, steadying breath, my mind racing with the implications of this revelation. "Clara, I need your help. I have to prove my innocence, and Nolan's adoption is the key. Will you testify to what you know?" There was a long pause, and then Clara's voice filled with resolve. "Yes, Jenna. I'll do whatever it takes to help you and Eli. This family has kept this secret for too long, and it's time the truth came out." As I hung up the phone, a glimmer of hope began to take root. With Clara's testimony and the evidence I'd gathered, I might just have a chance of proving my innocence and protecting my family. But the road ahead would be anything but easy. The drive to Clara's house was filled with a mixture of anticipation and dread. I knew that the information she possessed could be the key to unraveling this entire mess, but I also feared the fallout that might come from the truth being revealed. As I pulled into her driveway, I steeled myself, determined to get the answers I needed, no matter how difficult they might be. When Clara opened the door, the sadness in her eyes was palpable. "Thank you for coming, Jenna," she said, ushering me inside. "I know this isn't going to be easy, but I'm glad you reached out." We settled into the living room, the air thick with tension. I wasted no time in getting straight to the point. "Clara, I need you to tell me everything you know about Nolan's adoption. The truth could be the only thing that saves my family." She nodded solemnly, taking a deep breath before speaking. "It all started with my brother, Nolan's adoptive father. He and Marge had been trying for years to have a child, but it just never happened. Then one day, they found a baby abandoned in a park. That baby was Nolan." I felt a lump forming in my throat as Clara continued. "Marge was over the moon, of course. She saw it as a miracle, a second chance. But she was also terrified that the truth would come out, that Nolan would someday discover he was adopted." So they kept it a secret? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Clara replied, her eyes filled with regret. Marge made sure no one in the family ever breathed a word of it. She was convinced that if Nolan found out, he would be devastated and that it would ruin his life. I shook my head, the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. But that's why Eli's blood type is AB, isn't it? Nolan's not his real father. Clara nodded solemnly. I'm afraid so, Jenna. Nolan's true blood type is AB, which is why Eli's doesn't match yours or Nolan's. The secret has been buried for so long, and now it's threatening to tear your family apart. I felt a surge of anger, mixed with a deep sense of betrayal. All this time, Nolan has been accusing me of infidelity, when the truth is he's not even Eli's biological father. I clenched my fists, my eyes narrowing. And Marge, she must have known. She's been tormenting me all these years, hasn't she? Clara nodded solemnly. I'm afraid so, Jenna. Marge was ruthless in her determination to keep this secret hidden. She saw you as a threat to her perfect little family, and she did everything she could to make your life miserable. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, the gravity of the situation finally sinking in. This is unbelievable. Nolan has to know the truth. He deserves to know who he really is. Clara's eyes widened with alarm. Jenna, I'm not sure that's a good idea. Nolan has always been unstable, and this revelation could push him over the edge. You need to be careful. I shook my head resolutely. I don't care, Clara. I have to tell him. The truth is the only thing that can set us free from this nightmare. With that, I rose to my feet, determined to confront Nolan, and finally put an end to his baseless accusations. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was willing to risk it all to protect my family and reclaim my own integrity. As I drove back home, my mind raced with the implications of what Clara had revealed. Nolan's true blood type, his secret adoption, it was all too much to process. But I knew I had to act quickly if I wanted to protect Eli and clear my name. I pulled into the driveway, steeling myself for the confrontation that was to come. Nolan was waiting for me, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. Where have you been, Jenna? He demanded, his voice dripping with accusation. I've been trying to reach you all afternoon. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. I've been speaking with Clara, Nolan. There's something we need to discuss. He scoffed, his arms crossing over his chest. Clara? What could that old bat possibly have to say that's worth my time? It's about you, Nolan, I said, my voice steady. About your past, about the fact that you were adopted. The color drained from his face, and for a moment he seemed at a loss for words. What are you talking about? He finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. The truth, Nolan, I replied, my gaze unwavering. Clara told me everything. How you were found abandoned as a baby. How your mother, Marge, made sure the family kept it a secret all these years. Nolan's eyes widened, a mix of shock and rage flickering across his features. You're lying, he shouted, his fists clenching at his sides. This is just another one of your pathetic attempts to turn me against my own family. I held up a hand, silencing him. I'm not lying, Nolan, and I have proof, a letter from Clara confirming everything she told me. He stared at me, his chest heaving with each labored breath. No, this can't be happening, he muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. But it is, Nolan, I said, my voice tinged with sympathy. And it explains Eli's blood type. You're not his biological father. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut, and he staggered backward, his face contorted with anguish. You cheated on me, he gasped, his eyes wild with accusation. This is all your fault. I shook my head, refusing to back down. No, Nolan, Eli is your son, but not biologically. You were adopted, and that's why your blood types don't match. He stared at me for a long, tense moment, his breathing ragged. Then, without warning, he lunged forward, his hands closing around my throat. You bitch! He snarled, his grip tightening. You're trying to take everything from me! I clawed at his hands, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my ears. Just then, the door burst open, and a group of people rushed in. A mediator, a court-appointed guardian, and my attorney. That's enough, Mr. Parker, the mediator said, her voice firm and commanding. Let go of your wife, and we can discuss this like civilized adults. Nolan's grip loosened, and he backed away, his chest heaving. I coughed and sputtered, my hands trembling. What is the meaning of this? Nolan demanded, his eyes darting between the gathered group. We're here to help, Nolan, I said, my voice hoarse. I've arranged a mediated meeting so we can discuss Eli's future and resolve this situation in a constructive way. Nolan's eyes narrowed, his expression twisted with suspicion. You're up to something, Jenna. I can see it in your eyes. I met his gaze, my own eyes steely with determination. Yes, Nolan. I'm going to prove my innocence and protect my family, no matter what it takes. The mediated meeting was tense from the moment we all gathered in the conference room. Nolan sat across from me, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. The mediator, a seasoned family counselor, introduced herself and set the tone for the proceedings. All right, let's start by getting everything out in the open, she said, her voice calm and measured. Jenna, you've requested this meeting to discuss some important matters regarding your son, Eli. Would you like to begin? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation that was to come. Yes, thank you, I replied, my gaze locked with Nolan's. As you all know, Eli's recent hospitalization revealed a concerning discrepancy in his blood type. It's come to my attention that Nolan was actually adopted as a child and that his true blood type is AB. Nolan's face drained of color, and he shot to his feet, his chair clattering to the floor behind him. This is outrageous, he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. Jenna is lying, trying to twist the truth to suit her own agenda. The mediator raised a hand, her expression stern. Mr. Parker, please sit down and allow Jenna to continue. We're here to have a constructive dialogue, not hurl accusations. Nolan reluctantly complied, his jaw clenched tightly, his eyes smoldering with rage. Jenna, please go on, the mediator prompted. I took another deep breath, my gaze unwavering. Nolan's aunt, Clara, has confirmed that Nolan was indeed adopted as a baby, and that his blood type is AB. This explains why Eli's blood type doesn't match either of ours. Nolan is not Eli's biological father. The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Nolan's face was a mask of anguish and disbelief, his hands trembling. No, this can't be true, he stammered, his voice breaking. You're trying to destroy me, Jenna. You've always hated my family, and now you're using this to take Eli away from me. The mediator held up a hand, her expression sympathetic. Mr. Parker, I understand this must be a difficult revelation, but we need to remain focused on finding a resolution that is in the best interest of your son. Nolan shook his head vehemently, his eyes wild. Best interest? Jenna's the one who's betrayed me, betrayed our family. She's been unfaithful, and now she's trying to take Eli away. I felt a surge of anger and frustration. Nolan, I've never been unfaithful to you. Eli is your son, just not biologically. Your own family has been keeping this secret from you all these years, and I'm trying to bring the truth to light for all of our sakes. The mediator nodded, her gaze shifting between us. Clearly, there are deeper issues at play here that need to be addressed. Jenna, you mentioned having evidence to support your claims. Would you be willing to share that with us? I reached into my bag and pulled out the letter from Clara, handing it to the mediator. This letter from Nolan's aunt, Clara, confirms his adoption and the fact that his blood type is AB. It's the proof I've been searching for to clear my name and protect my family. The mediator scanned the letter, her brow furrowing in concentration. Nolan watched, his face a mask of anguish and disbelief, as the truth of his past unraveled before him. This appears to be a legitimate document, the mediator finally said, her voice grave. Mr. Parker, I'm afraid the evidence presented here does substantiate Jenna's claims. Nolan's world seemed to crumble before my eyes, his carefully constructed reality shattered beyond repair. As he sat there, his body shaking with a mix of emotions, I knew that the tide had finally turned in my favor. The aftermath of the mediated meeting was nothing short of explosive. Nolan, reeling from the revelation of his adoption and the truth about Eli's paternity, had spiraled into a state of emotional turmoil. As the mediator's words sank in, his face contorted with a mix of anguish and rage. He pushed himself away from the table, his chair clattering to the floor as he paced the room like a caged animal. This can't be happening, he muttered, his hands trembling. It's all a lie, a conspiracy to destroy me. The mediator tried to interject, her voice calm and measured, but Nolan cut her off with a vicious swipe of his hand. No, you listen to me, he shouted, his eyes wild. Jenna has been unfaithful, and she's using this nonsense about my adoption to take Eli away from me. I felt a surge of anger and frustration, but I forced myself to remain composed. "Nolan, please," I pleaded, my voice steady. "This isn't about taking Eli away from you. It's about protecting him and our family from the truth you've been hiding all these years." Nolan's gaze locked with mine, his expression contorted with a mix of hurt and betrayal. "Protecting him?" he spat. "You're the one who's been lying, Jenna. You've betrayed me, and now you want to take everything I have." The mediator intervened, her voice firm. "Mr. Parker, I understand this is an extremely difficult situation, but we need to remain focused on the best interests of your son. Attacking your wife is not going to solve anything." Nolan's nostrils flared, and for a moment I thought he might lash out again. But then something seemed to shift in his demeanor, and he slumped back into his chair, his head in his hands. "This can't be happening," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "My whole life has been a lie." I felt a twinge of sympathy, despite everything that had happened. "Nolan, I know this is hard, but we need to find a way to move forward for Eli's sake." He lifted his head, his eyes filled with anguish. "Move forward? How can I, when everything I thought I knew has been ripped away from me?" The mediator leaned forward, her expression grave. "Mr. Parker, I understand your pain, but the well-being of your son must be the priority here. Jenna has presented evidence that casts serious doubt on your biological relationship to Eli. We need to explore options that will ensure his stability and safety." Nolan's gaze darted between the mediator and me, his expression shifting from despair to rage. "Stability and safety? You think I'm going to let Jenna take my son away from me?" I steeled myself, knowing that the battle was far from over. "Nolan, I'm not trying to take Eli away from you, but I need to ensure his well-being, and that means proving my innocence and getting full custody." Nolan's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a snarl. "Over my dead body, Jenna. I'll fight you tooth and nail, and I'll make sure you never see Eli again." The mediator tried to interject, but Nolan was having none of it. He pushed himself up from the table, his chair clattering to the floor once more. "This is not over," he growled, his gaze fixed on me. "I'll destroy you, Jenna, and I'll take everything you hold dear." With that, he stormed out of the room, leaving me trembling with a mix of fear and determination. I knew that the war had only just begun. The aftermath of the mediated meeting was nothing short of chaos. Nolan's emotional unraveling had shaken me to the core, and I knew that the legal battle ahead would be an uphill climb. But I was more determined than ever to protect Eli and secure our future, no matter the cost. In the days that followed, I filed for divorce in full custody of Eli, presenting the overwhelming evidence that had been uncovered. Nolan's erratic behavior and threats only served to bolster my case, and the court ruled firmly in my favor. As the judge delivered the verdict, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Eli would be safe, and Nolan's control over our lives had been shattered. The settlement was substantial, a testament to the emotional distress and defamation I had endured. With my newfound financial freedom, I was able to leave our old life behind and start anew. I found a cozy little house not too far from Eli's school and set about creating a peaceful, nurturing environment for him. My family and friends rallied around us, offering their unwavering support and love. Eli, bless his heart, had weathered the storm with remarkable resilience. He seemed to sense the change in the air, the newfound sense of security and stability that enveloped us. Gone were the tense, uneasy silences that had once permeated our home, replaced by the sound of Eli's laughter and the gentle hum of our daily routines. As for Nolan, he had become a shadow of his former self. Stripped of his business and his financial resources, he struggled to find his footing. Attempts to reconcile with Eli were met with fierce resistance, and Jenna's pleas for visitation rights were repeatedly denied. I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for the man I had once loved, but any trace of that emotion was quickly drowned out by the memories of his cruelty and the trauma he had inflicted. He had chosen his path, and now he had to live with the consequences. In the weeks that followed, Eli and I began to heal, finding solace in the simple joys of our new life. We would spend lazy afternoons in the park, Eli's laughter ringing out as he chased after butterflies. At night, we would curl up on the couch, sharing stories and dreams, our bond growing stronger with each passing day. Slowly but surely, the wounds of the past began to mend, and a sense of hope and possibility took root in my heart. I knew that the road ahead would not be an easy one, but with Eli by my side and the support of my loved ones, I felt an unwavering determination to build a future filled with love, security, and the promise of a fresh start. As I tucked Eli into bed one night, his eyes sparkling with contentment, I couldn't help but smile. We had weathered the storm, and we had emerged stronger for it. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew that we would face them together, united in our resilience and our unwavering love.